The morning of July 3, 1941, dawned gray and cold over the Belarusian forests near Minsk, despite being the height of summer. Senior Lieutenant Dmitri Volkov of the Soviet 100th Rifle Division stood in what should have been his battalion's defensive position and found nothing. No soldiers, no equipment, no bodies, no signs of battle, just empty trenches and an eerie silence broken only by distant artillery rumbling from the German advance. His hands trembled slightly as he lit a cigarette, not from fear but from the wrongness of what he was seeing. A battalion of 600 men did not simply disappear, yet that was precisely what appeared to have happened. Volkov had been ordered to check on the 2nd Battalion's position, which had stopped responding to radio communications the previous evening. Communications failures were common in the chaos of the German invasion. Equipment malfunctioned, operators were killed, units were overrun before they could report. But complete radio silence from an entire battalion, combined with the absence of any sounds of combat from their sector, had worried the divisional commander enough to send Volkov with a platoon to investigate. What he found defied explanation. The trenches were well constructed, showing evidence of proper military engineering. Ammunition was stacked neatly in storage bays. Personal equipment, packs, canteens, even rifles, lay where they had apparently been set down. In one dugout, Volkov found a pot of kasha still sitting on a small stove, the grain cooked but cold, as if someone had prepared breakfast and then simply walked away before eating. In another position, he discovered a letter half-written, the pencil lying beside it as though the writer had been interrupted mid-sentence. "Sir?" one of his soldiers called from a nearby trench. "You need to see this." Volkov walked over to find the soldier pointing at a pair of boots standing upright in the mud, as if their owner had stepped out of them and walked away barefoot. Nearby was a helmet, set carefully on a fire step, not dropped or thrown aside as it would be in combat. Further along the trench line, they found more personal items arranged in ways that suggested deliberate placement rather than hasty abandonment. Watches hanging from nails, photographs propped against sandbags, a harmonica resting on a crate of ammunition. "Where are they?" the soldier asked, his voice tight with an emotion Volkov recognized as the particular unease that comes from encountering something that violates the natural order. "Where did they go?" Volkov had no answer. He ordered his men to search the area thoroughly, expanding their sweep beyond the immediate trench system into the surrounding forest. Perhaps the battalion had withdrawn without orders, or had been repositioned without proper communication to higher headquarters. Perhaps there was a rational explanation that would reveal itself with further investigation. But as the hours passed and the search area expanded, the mystery only deepened. They found no bodies, no blood, no shell craters or bullet impacts that would indicate a battle had occurred. They found no tracks suggesting a large body of troops had moved through the area. They found no signs of German presence, no abandoned German equipment, no evidence of German casualties, nothing to suggest the enemy had even been near this position. What they did find, scattered through the forest in a rough circle, perhaps 500 meters from the trenches, were more personal items. A soldier's tunic draped over a branch, far from any trail. A rifle leaning against a tree, fully loaded, the safety on. A pair of glasses carefully folded and placed on a stump. Each item seemed deliberately positioned, placed rather than dropped, as if the owners had removed them with care and intention before. Before what? Volkov's mind struggled to construct a narrative that made sense. By afternoon, Volkov had to report back to division headquarters. He stood in the communication trench, composing his report in his mind, trying to find words that would convey what he had found without sounding insane. "How did you report that 600 men had vanished without trace? That their equipment remained but the men were gone? That there was no evidence of combat, no indication of where they had gone or what had happened to them?" The radio operator looked at him expectantly, headset ready. Volkov took a breath and began his report, keeping his voice steady and professional even as he described the impossible. "Division headquarters, this is Volkov. I have completed reconnaissance of 2nd Battalion's position. The position is intact but abandoned. No personnel present. No signs of combat. No indication of enemy action. Requesting instructions." The response, when it came after a long pause, was terse. "Repeat your last transmission." Volkov repeated the report, adding details this time, the number of rifles found, the condition of the positions, the presence of personal equipment. He did not mention the eerie arrangement of items in the forest, the sense of wrongness that permeated the entire scene, or the way his soldiers were looking over their shoulders as if expecting the vanished battalion to materialize from the trees. The voice from division headquarters was different now, belonging to someone senior. "Lieutenant Volkov, are you reporting that an entire battalion has deserted?" "No, sir," Volkov replied carefully. "I am reporting that an entire battalion is absent from their position, with no indication of where they went or why. Their weapons and equipment remain. There is no evidence of combat or of enemy presence." Another pause, longer this time. "Then, secure the position and remain there. Investigation team is being dispatched. Do not discuss your findings with anyone outside your immediate unit." The radio went silent. Volkov stood in the trench looking at the empty positions around him and felt the weight of something beyond his understanding pressing down on his shoulders. In 2 weeks of desperate fighting since the German invasion began, he had seen terrible things. Men torn apart by artillery, positions overrun by panzers, entire companies destroyed in hours of combat. But he had never seen anything like this. The dead he could understand, the wounded he could help. But men who simply vanished? That was something else entirely. As evening approached and the investigation team had not yet arrived, Volkov ordered his men to establish a defensive perimeter. They would spend the night in the trenches the missing battalion had dug, surrounded by the ghosts of 600 men whose fate remained unknown. His soldiers were clearly unsettled, speaking in hushed voices, clustering together rather than spreading out along the trench line as they should. "Lieutenant," one of them ventured, "what do you think happened to them?" Volkov considered several responses before settling on the truth. "I don't know, Private. I've never seen anything like this. Could the Germans have captured them all? Without firing a shot? Without any signs of struggle? Without taking their weapons?" Volkov shook his head. "I don't see how. Then where are they?" The question hung in the air, unanswered and unanswerable. Where were they indeed? 600 men did not simply evaporate. Yet all the evidence suggested that was exactly what had happened. They had been here. Their presence was written in every detail of the camp, every personal item left behind, every indication of normal military routine suddenly interrupted. And then they were gone, as completely as if they had never existed. As darkness fell, Volkov found himself thinking about the old stories his grandmother had told him as a child, tales of the forest spirits that could steal people away, of places where the boundary between worlds grew thin, of disappearances that could never be explained. He had dismissed such stories as superstition, the fantasies of illiterate peasants who needed myths to explain what they could not understand. But standing in these trenches, surrounded by the absence of 600 men who should be here, he found those old stories creeping back into his thoughts. He forced himself to think rationally. There had to be an explanation. Perhaps the battalion had received orders to relocate and had misunderstood, leaving their heavy equipment behind in preparation for a rapid march. Perhaps they had been captured through some trick or stratagem that left no physical evidence. Perhaps there was something he was missing, some crucial piece of information that would make everything make sense. But even as he constructed these rational explanations, a part of him knew they were insufficient. The careful arrangement of personal items, the food left cooking, the letter abandoned mid-sentence. These were not the signs of a unit that had received orders to move. These were the signs of something else, something that did not fit into any category his military training had prepared him. For the night was quiet except for the normal sounds of the forest and the distant rumble of artillery from other sectors of the front. Volkov stood watch, as commanders do, moving along the trench line, checking on his men, maintaining the routine of military vigilance, even though he had no idea what he was watching for. What enemy could make 600 men disappear? What threat could they possibly defend against if it came for them as it apparently had come for the missing battalion? Around midnight, one of his sentries called out softly, "Sir, do you hear that?" Volkov listened. At first he heard nothing unusual, just the wind moving through the trees. Then he caught it, a sound like voices, distant and indistinct, speaking words he could not make out. The sound seemed to come from the forest, from the direction where they had found the scattered personal items. "What is that?" the sentry whispered. "I don't know," Volkov admitted. "Stay alert. Do not fire unless you have a clear target." They listened as the voices continued, rising and falling like conversation, sometimes seeming very close and sometimes fading into distance. Volkov strained to make out words, but the sound remained frustratingly unclear, like trying to understand speech from the next room through a closed door. Were they hearing the missing soldiers? German troops moving through the forest? Or something else entirely? The sound continued for perhaps 20 minutes, then faded and did not return. Volkov's men were clearly rattled, gripping their weapons tightly, staring into the darkness as if expecting something to emerge from the trees. He moved among them, speaking calmly, maintaining the appearance of command, even though he felt as uncertain as they did. Dawn came eventually, as it always does, bringing with it the mundane reality of daylight and the arrival of the investigation team from division headquarters. Major Pavel Sokolov commanded the team, a NKVD political officer whose presence indicated that higher authorities were taking this matter very seriously indeed. The NKVD, the People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs, was responsible for, among other things, investigating potential treachery, desertion, and anti-Soviet activity within the military. Major Sokolov was a compact man in his 40s, his uniform immaculate despite the field conditions, his expression revealing nothing. He arrived with a team of 10 men, some NKVD troops, some specialists whose exact function Volkov could not immediately determine. Sokolov's first act was to order Volkov's platoon to withdraw to a position 200 meters from the missing battalion's trenches, establishing a cordon that would prevent anyone from entering or leaving the investigation area. "You will report everything you observed," Sokolov told Volkov, his tone making it clear this was not a request. "Every detail, no matter how insignificant it may seem." Volkov complied, describing the empty trenches, the abandoned equipment, the personal items found scattered in the forest, the absence of any signs of combat or enemy presence. He did not mention the voices his men had heard during the night. That seemed too subjective, too likely to be dismissed or to cast doubt on his reliability as a witness. Sokolov listened without interruption, his face expressionless. When Volkov finished, the major asked a single question. "In your professional judgment as a military officer, what happened here?" "I don't know, Major," Volkov admitted. "Nothing in my training or experience provides an explanation for what I observed." Could the battalion have deserted en masse? 600 men deserting simultaneously, leaving their weapons and equipment behind, leaving no trail indicating their direction of movement? I find that difficult to credit, sir. Could they have been captured by German forces? Without any signs of combat? Without any evidence of German presence in the area? Without the Germans taking the weapons and equipment they left behind? That seems equally unlikely. Sokolov nodded slowly. You understand, Lieutenant, that this matter is of the highest sensitivity. You will discuss your observations with no one except those I authorize. The security of the Soviet Union may depend on maintaining silence about what has occurred here. The phrasing struck Volkov as odd. How could the disappearance of one battalion, tragic though it was, threaten national security? Unless this was not an isolated incident. Unless other units had vanished in similar circumstances. Unless there was something larger happening that he was seeing only a small piece of. I understand, Major, he said, keeping these speculations to himself. Sokolov's investigation team began their work with systematic thoroughness. They measured distances, took photographs, collected items for analysis. They expanded the search area, pushing deeper into the forest, looking for any trace of the missing men. Volkov watched from his position on the perimeter, trying to understand what they were looking for, what theory might explain the evidence they were gathering. By midday, one of Sokolov's specialists, a man in civilian clothes despite the military setting, approached the major with something in his hand. Volkov could not see what it was, but he observed Sokolov's reaction, a momentary widening of the eyes, quickly controlled, followed by a curt nod and what appeared to be orders for the specialist to continue his search in a specific area of the forest. Hours passed. The investigation team worked methodically, occasionally discovering something that would prompt consultation between Sokolov and his specialists. None of their findings were shared with Volkov or his men, who remained on the perimeter watching, waiting, growing increasingly uneasy as the day wore on without any explanation being offered. As evening approached, Sokolov summoned Volkov to what had been the battalion commander's dugout. Inside, spread across a makeshift table, were various items the investigation team had collected. Volkov recognized some of them, Personal effects from the missing soldiers, items they had found scattered in the forest. But there were other things as well, things that looked like they had been dug from the ground. Fragments of metal, pieces of something that might have been fabric, and objects whose purpose Volkov could not immediately identify. "Lieutenant," Sokolov began, his voice carefully neutral, "I'm going to tell you something that must never leave this room. The security classification of what I am about to share is higher than your current clearance level, but circumstances require that you be informed. Do you understand the consequences of violating state security?" "Yes, Major." Sokolov gestured to the items on the table. "This is not the first incident of this nature. Over the past month, we have had reports of similar disappearances involving smaller units. A platoon here, a squad there. This is the largest such incident to date, which is why I was sent to investigate personally." Volkov felt his mouth go dry. "You're saying this has happened before?" "Multiple times across different sectors of the front. Always the same pattern. Positions found intact but abandoned. No signs of combat. Personal effects left behind. No indication of where the soldiers went. What's causing it?" Sokolov was quiet for a moment, seeming to weigh how much to reveal. "We don't know. The obvious theories, mass desertion, German capture operations, partisan activity, do not fit the evidence. We are investigating other possibilities." "What other possibilities?" Instead of answering directly, Sokolov picked up one of the metal fragments from the table. This was found approximately 100 meters from the trenches, buried approximately half a meter below the surface. Preliminary analysis suggests it is not of Soviet manufacture, nor is it consistent with German equipment we have examined. Volkov looked at the fragment, trying to understand what Sokolov was implying. "Then whose is it?" "That is the question we are attempting to answer. There are theories, highly classified theories that I am not authorized to discuss with you. What I can tell you is that your battalion will remain here for the next 48 hours, securing this area while our investigation continues. You will prevent anyone, and I mean anyone regardless of rank, from entering this zone without my personal authorization. You will use lethal force if necessary to maintain this security. Do you understand?" "Yes, Major." "Good. I will be remaining on site with my team. If anything unusual occurs, anything at all, you will report it to me immediately." "Understood." "Understood, sir." As Volkov returned to his men to pass on the necessary orders, his mind raced with implications. Sokolov's careful phrasing, his mention of classified theories, the fragment of unknown origin, all of it suggested something beyond conventional military explanation. But what? What could cause soldiers to vanish without trace? What could leave behind fragments of unidentified material buried in the earth? The second night passed in tense watchfulness. Volkov's men maintained strict security, alert for any movement in the forest, any sound that might indicate. What? They didn't even know what they were watching for. Around 3 a.m., several soldiers on the perimeter reported seeing lights moving through the trees, not flashlights or lanterns, but something else. Something that moved in patterns that seemed deliberate but made no sense. Volkov reported this to Sokolov, who acknowledged the information without comment and dispatched some of his team to investigate. They found nothing, or at least they reported finding nothing. Volkov noticed that after this incident, Sokolov's team intensified their search of a particular area of the forest, the same area where the lights had been seen. Whatever they were looking for, they were not sharing their findings with Volkov or his men. On the morning of the third day, Sokolov informed Volkov that the investigation had concluded, that the area would be released back to normal military control, and that the missing battalion would be officially listed as destroyed in combat, despite the complete lack of evidence supporting this conclusion. The actual circumstances of their disappearance would remain classified at the highest level. What happened to them? Volkov asked, unable to contain his need to know. Sokolov looked at him for a long moment before answering. Lieutenant, there are things occurring in this war that do not fit into conventional military categories. Things that challenge our understanding of what is possible. The Soviet state is investigating these matters with the resources they deserve. That is all I can tell you. That is all you need to know. You will never speak of what you observed here. You will never mention this incident in reports or conversations. As far as official records are concerned, the 2nd Battalion was destroyed in heavy fighting against German forces on July 2, 1941. That is the only truth that exists. Do you understand? Yes, Major. I hope you do, Lieutenant. For your sake, I truly hope you do. Volkov's division was pulled back from the front 3 days later, withdrawn for rest and reconstitution after suffering heavy casualties in the fighting around Minsk. During the brief respite, Volkov found himself thinking constantly about the missing battalion and Sokolov's cryptic warnings. He wanted to believe there was a rational explanation he simply hadn't been told about. Perhaps some new German weapon. Perhaps a secret operation gone wrong that authorities wanted to conceal. But the more he thought about it, the less sense any conventional explanation made. It was during this period that Volkov encountered Captain Mikhail Petrov, an intelligence officer he had known before the war. They met by chance at a field headquarters where both were waiting to receive new orders. Petrov, noting Volkov's distracted demeanor, invited him to share a bottle of vodka, always available somehow, regardless of how dire the military situation, and asked what was troubling him. Volkov knew he should say nothing. Sokolov's warnings had been explicit, but the burden of what he knew, the mystery of what had happened, the need to confide in someone who might understand, all of this overwhelmed his better judgment. He told Petrov everything, swearing him to secrecy, describing the empty trenches and the NKVD investigation, and Sokolov's cryptic comments about classified theories. Petrov listened in silence, his expression growing increasingly serious. When Volkov finished, the captain poured them both another drink and spoke quietly. "I'm going to tell you something that could get us both shot," Petrov said. "But you've been honest with me, so I'll be honest with you. You're not the first person to report incidents like this. Intelligence has been collecting reports for weeks now. Incidents scattered across the entire front. Units disappearing. Strange lights in the sky. Equipment malfunctioning in ways that make no sense. Areas where radio communications fail completely for no apparent reason. And people like that NKVD major investigating it all, keeping everything buried under layers of classification. What do they think is causing it?" Volkov asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Officially, there's no official explanation because officially nothing unusual is happening. Unofficially," Petrov shrugged. "There are theories ranging from new German weapons to other possibilities." "What other possibilities?" Petrov looked around to ensure they were alone before continuing. "You know, the Germans have been developing advanced technology. Jets, rockets, guided bombs. Intelligence has reports that they're working on things even more exotic. Some analysts think these disappearances might be related to German weapons testing. Tests of some kind of new weapon that can affect entire units somehow. And you? What do you think?" "I think something is happening that we don't understand. I think it's bigger than just German weapons. And I think authorities are more frightened by it than they're willing to admit." Before Volkov could respond, they were interrupted by a sergeant announcing that new orders had arrived. The conversation ended there, but it left Volkov with more questions than answers. If incidents like the one he witnessed were occurring across the entire front, if even high-level intelligence officers were uncertain about the cause, then what were they really facing? What force could make trained soldiers vanish without trace? And why were authorities so determined to keep it secret? Volkov's division was sent back to the front within a week, assigned to defensive positions near Smolensk, where Soviet forces were attempting to slow the German advance. The fighting was brutal, the casualties heavy, and Volkov had little time to dwell on mysteries when faced with the immediate reality of German tanks and infantry trying to destroy his unit. But even in the midst of combat, he noticed things that seemed wrong. On July 28th, a forward observation post failed to report in. When a patrol was sent to investigate, they found the post abandoned, the observer's equipment still in place, no signs of combat. The patrol commander reported the incident as observers killed or captured by German infiltrators, but Volkov recognized the pattern. The missing observers' bodies were never found. On August 3rd, an entire platoon vanished from a defensive position during the night. Again, no signs of combat, no indication of where they had gone. Again, officially listed as killed in action, despite the lack of evidence. Volkov said nothing, remembering Sokolov's warnings. But he kept his own private record, noting dates and locations, documenting a pattern that official records were being altered to conceal. By mid-August, Volkov had documented 7 separate incidents of personnel disappearing under mysterious circumstances, all within his division's operational area. The numbers were small individually, a squad here, a platoon there, but they were accumulating. If this pattern was being repeated across the entire front, as Petrov had suggested, Then hundreds or perhaps thousands of Soviet soldiers had vanished without explanation. And then, on August 19, 1941, Volkov experienced something that transformed his understanding of the situation from abstract mystery to immediate horror. His company was defending a village near the Dnieper River, preparing for an expected German assault. The attack came at dawn, the usual pattern of artillery bombardment followed by infantry and tanks. Volkov's men fought well, holding their positions despite heavy casualties, waiting for the artillery support that higher headquarters had promised. The support never came. The artillery battery that was supposed to be supporting them, a full battery, 6 guns with perhaps 60 men, simply did not fire. Volkov could see their position from his command post, could see the gun emplacements clearly, but no shells fell on the advancing Germans. No fire came from the battery position. When the German assault was finally repulsed, at horrific cost, without the artillery support that should have made the defense much easier, Volkov led a team to the artillery position to find out why they hadn't fired. What he found made his blood run cold. The artillery pieces were there, properly positioned and ready to fire. Ammunition was stacked in the usual neat piles. Shell casings from the previous day's firing still littered the ground. But the artillerymen were gone. All of them. 60 men had disappeared, leaving behind their guns, their equipment, their personal effects. And in the center of the battery position, Volkov found something new. A circular area perhaps 10 meters in diameter where the grass was burned black, where the earth seemed to have been subjected to intense heat, where metal fragments of unknown origin were partially buried in the scorched ground. This time, Volkov did not wait for an investigation team. He ordered his men to secure the area, and he personally called division headquarters demanding to speak with Major Sokolov or whoever was handling investigations of unusual incidents. The duty officer tried to deflect him, but Volkov was insistent, his voice carrying an edge of hysteria he could not entirely suppress. "Listen to me," he said into the radio. "This is happening again. Right now, another unit is gone, and this time there's physical evidence. You need to send someone immediately." There was a long pause, then a different voice came on the line, older, with the accent of someone from Moscow. "Lieutenant Volkov, this is Colonel Zhuravlev, Division Intelligence. Describe what you have found." Volkov described the scene, including the burned circle and the metal fragments. He heard the colonel's sharp intake of breath when he mentioned these details. "Secure the area," Zhuravlev ordered. "Allow no one to approach. A team will be with you within 2 hours." "Lieutenant, I cannot stress enough the importance of maintaining absolute secrecy about what you have observed. The penalties for violating state security in this matter are severe." "Do you understand?" "Yes, Colonel." "But sir, what is happening? What's causing this?" Another long pause. "Then, that is precisely what we are trying to determine, Lieutenant. Maintain your position. Help is coming." The team that arrived was larger than the one Sokolov had brought, including specialists with equipment Volkov had never seen before, instruments that seemed to be measuring things invisible to the eye, devices that were carefully positioned around the burned circle, personnel in protective suits, collecting samples of the scorched earth and metal fragments. And at the center of it all was a man who introduced himself simply as Commissar Volsky, a high-ranking NKVD official whose presence indicated the absolute seriousness with which authorities were treating these incidents. Volsky was tall, gaunt, with eyes that seemed to look through people rather than at them. He questioned Volkov extensively, wanting to know every detail of the artillery battery's disappearance, every observation Volkov had made, every oddity he had noticed. "The men who disappeared," Volsky asked, "did any of them report unusual experiences in the days before the incident? Strange dreams? Unexplained illnesses? Unusual behavior?" Volkov thought back. One of the artillery sergeants mentioned that several of his men had been complaining of headaches for the past few days. "They requested medical attention, but our medical supplies are limited, so they were just given some aspirin and told to continue their duties." "Why?" "Because that is consistent with other incidents," Volsky said. "There appears to be a pattern. Personnel who are later affected often report neurological symptoms, headaches, disorientation, sensory disturbances, in the period before the actual disappearance event. You're saying this can be predicted? That we could identify who's at risk?" Perhaps we are attempting to establish whether there are warning signs that could allow us to evacuate personnel before an incident occurs. But understanding the phenomenon and preventing it are proving to be two very different challenges. Volsky's team worked through the night, their activities illuminated by generator-powered lights that seemed too bright in the darkness of the front lines. Volkov watched from a distance, seeing them take measurements, collect samples, photograph the site from every angle. Around midnight, he saw Volsky and several specialists gathered around one of their instruments, speaking in urgent tones, their body language suggesting they had discovered something significant. When dawn came, Volsky approached Volkov one final time. He looked exhausted, and something in his eyes suggested fear, real fear, from a man whose position and power should have made him afraid of nothing. Lieutenant Volkov, what I'm about to tell you is known to perhaps a dozen people in the entire Soviet Union. You will be the 13th. The penalty for revealing this information is immediate execution, no trial, no appeal. Do you understand? Yes, Commissar. Good, because you need to understand what you've witnessed, both for your own protection and because you may witness it again. What is causing these disappearances is not a German weapon. It is not any kind of conventional threat that we understand. Our best assessment, and I emphasize that this is assessment based on incomplete evidence, is that we are dealing with a phenomenon that may be extraterrestrial in origin. Volkov stared at him, certain he had misunderstood. Extraterrestrial? You mean from space? From another world? We mean exactly that. The metal fragments found at these sites are composed of alloys that do not exist in any terrestrial context. The energy signatures we detect are inconsistent with any known technology, German or otherwise. The patterns of disappearance, the physical evidence, the unusual symptoms reported by affected personnel, all of it suggests we are dealing with something from beyond Earth. Volkov felt his understanding of reality shifting, cracking, reforming around this impossible information. That's not possible. That can't be real. I assure you, Lieutenant, it is very real. And it is happening more frequently. We have documented over 40 separate incidents since the beginning of the war, affecting more than 2,000 Soviet personnel. The numbers are increasing. We don't know why. We don't know if it's related to the war itself, some kind of observation or intervention by an external force, or if it's coincidental to the conflict. But it is happening, and we are powerless to stop it. Does the German side know? Are they experiencing the same thing? Intelligence suggests they are, though they appear to be equally baffled. We have intercepted German communications that reference similar incidents, though their explanations differ from ours. Some German commanders apparently believe they are dealing with Soviet secret weapons. Ironic, considering we're having the same thought about them. What do we do? How do we protect our soldiers from this? Volsky's expression was grim. We can't, not reliably. All we can do is document incidents when they occur, collect whatever evidence we can, and hope that eventually we understand enough to develop countermeasures. In the meantime, you will continue your duties, you will fight the Germans as you have been doing, and you will never speak of what you've learned here. Do you understand? Yes, Commissar. But if this is happening to our troops, shouldn't they be warned? Shouldn't we tell them? Tell them what? Volsky interrupted. That an unknown force from beyond Earth is randomly abducting Soviet soldiers and there's nothing we can do to prevent it? That would destroy morale completely. Better they think their comrades died in combat than know the truth. Better they believe they're fighting only Germans than understand that there's another threat we can neither see nor fight. The months that followed were among the strangest of Dmitri Volkov's life. He fought through the autumn and winter of 1941-42, participating in the defense of Moscow, surviving the German offensive that came heartbreakingly close to capturing the Soviet capital. He experienced all the normal horrors of that desperate campaign, the brutal cold, the savage combat, the starvation and disease and death that surrounded him constantly. But now he also lived with the knowledge of the other thing, the unexplainable thing that could reach out at any moment and make soldiers simply cease to exist. He watched his men, looking for the warning signs Volsky had mentioned. Unexplained headaches, disorientation, sensory disturbances. Several times he thought he detected these symptoms and quietly reassigned those soldiers to rear area duties, inventing excuses that wouldn't reveal his real concerns. He never knew if these transfers saved anyone's life, if the symptoms he noticed were actually indicators of impending disappearance or just the normal ailments of men under extreme stress. He documented 3 more disappearance incidents during that winter, each following the now familiar pattern. Each time, investigation teams would arrive, collect evidence, remind him of his obligation to secrecy, and leave. Each time, official records would list the missing men as killed in action, maintaining the fiction that nothing unusual was occurring. He tried once to discuss the matter with Captain Petrov, but the intelligence officer cut him off immediately. "Don't," Petrov said quietly. "Don't speak about that, not ever. You don't know who might be listening, and you don't want to find out. But more men are disappearing. Doesn't anyone care? Of course they care. But what can they do? Fight an enemy they can't see, can't predict, can't understand. The only thing they can control is information, so that's what they control. They suppress knowledge of the incidents. They maintain the fiction that everything is normal, and they hope that somehow they'll figure out how to stop it before too many soldiers are lost. And if they can't figure it out," Petrov shrugged, "then I suppose we keep fighting the Germans and hope that whatever is taking our men decides to take them instead." In February 1942, Volkov received unexpected orders to report to Moscow for reassignment. He traveled to the capital by train, the journey taking 3 days through snow-covered countryside where burned-out villages and wrecked equipment testified to the recent fighting. Moscow itself was scarred but defiant, its citizens having survived the siege and German defeat before the city. He was taken to a nondescript building in the city center, led through corridors that seemed designed to disorient, and finally brought to an office where Commissar Volsky waited. "Lieutenant Volkov." Volsky greeted him. "Thank you for coming. I have a proposition for you, sir. You have encountered the phenomenon we discussed last year on multiple occasions. You have proven yourself capable of maintaining security about sensitive information. You have also demonstrated initiative and observational skills that we find valuable. I am offering you a position with a special unit tasked with investigating these incidents. The work will be dangerous, the hours long, the psychological strain considerable, but you would be contributing to understanding and potentially preventing a threat to the Soviet people. Are you interested?" Volkov thought about the empty trenches, the missing artillery battery, the burned circles in the earth. He thought about the 600 men of that 1st Battalion who had vanished in July 1941, whose fate remained unknown, who existed in official records only as casualties of conventional combat. What would this position involve exactly? You would be part of a team of military officers and scientific specialists responding to disappearance incidents across multiple fronts. You would investigate the scenes, collect evidence, interview witnesses when available, and attempt to identify patterns that might help us predict or prevent future occurrences. You would work directly under NKVD supervision, with authority to requisition resources and personnel as needed for your investigations. And you would carry the burden of knowledge that cannot be shared, of understanding a threat that officially does not exist. Volkov looked at Volsky's gaunt face, at the eyes that had seen too much. He thought about returning to conventional military service, where the enemies were human and the rules made sense, where death was terrible but at least comprehensible. Then he thought about the soldiers who would continue to disappear, who would vanish without trace while their comrades remained ignorant of what had really happened to them. "I accept." "Commissar?" Volsky nodded as if he had expected this answer. "Good. You will begin training immediately. There are things you need to learn: how to properly document these scenes, how to use detection equipment we've developed, how to identify the various types of incidents we've categorized. You should know that of the 12 officers who have held this position before you, 3 have died in the line of duty, 2 have suffered psychological breakdowns requiring hospitalization, and 1 simply disappeared while investigating an incident in Ukraine. The work is not safe, Lieutenant." "Nothing about this is safe." "I understand, sir. I hope you do. Report to Building 7 at the Military Academy at 800 tomorrow. Your training instructor will be waiting." The training was unlike anything Volkov had experienced in his military career. He learned to use instruments that measured electromagnetic fields, radiation levels, and energy signatures he didn't fully understand. He studied photographs and reports from dozens of previous incidents, learning to recognize patterns in the physical evidence. He was taught interview techniques designed to extract accurate information from traumatized witnesses without leading them to false conclusions. He learned protocols for securing incident scenes, for collecting and preserving evidence, for maintaining the careful documentation that might someday lead to understanding. Most significantly, He studied the theories that various Soviet scientists and intelligence analysts had developed to explain the phenomena. There was the extraterrestrial hypothesis, that the disappearances were caused by beings from another world, though whether these beings were deliberately abducting soldiers or whether the disappearances were some kind of side effect of their presence remained unclear. There was the dimensional hypothesis, that the incidents represented breaches between our reality and some other plane of existence, with victims falling through these breaches into unknown destinations. There was the temporal hypothesis, that the disappearances involved displacement in time rather than space, that the missing soldiers might be scattered across past or future rather than moved to different locations. None of these theories could be proven. None adequately explained all the evidence. But they represented humanity's desperate attempt to impose rational framework on something that seemed to defy rationality. Volkov met the other members of the investigative team, 4 officers and 3 civilians, each with specialized knowledge or experience. There was Major Anatoly Kuznetsov, a decorated combat veteran who had survived 3 separate disappearance incidents, each time being among the few soldiers who happened to be outside the affected area. There was Dr. Sofia Petrova, a physicist who had been pulled from her academic position to help investigate the anomalous energy signatures associated with incidents. There was Senior Sergeant Yuri Ivanov, a former NKVD investigator whose methodical approach to evidence collection had proven invaluable. The others each brought their own expertise to the work. They were a strange group, united by knowledge of something they could never speak about publicly, bound together by the burden of investigating an enemy they could not fight. Over the weeks of training and then months of working together, they developed the dark humor and mutual support necessary to maintain sanity while dealing with the impossible. Volkov's first field investigation as part of this unit came in April 1942, when a rifle company disappeared from positions near Kharkov. He traveled to the site with Major Kuznetsov and Dr. Petrova, arriving to find the now familiar scene: intact positions, abandoned equipment, no signs of combat. But this incident included a new element: survivors. 3 soldiers had been outside the affected area when the incident occurred, gathering firewood in a small grove roughly 100 meters from the company's position. They had returned to find their comrades gone. One of the survivors was coherent and able to provide a detailed account. The other 2 were in varying states of shock, one catatonic and unresponsive, the other muttering repeatedly about the light and the sound. Volkov interviewed the coherent survivor, a corporal named Alexei Sokolov, using the techniques he had been taught. "Tell me exactly what you observed," Volkov said gently. "Start from when you left to gather firewood." Sokolov's voice was steady, but his hands trembled. "We left around 1400 hours, sir. Just the 3 of us. The company was preparing defensive positions, digging, stringing wire, the usual. Everything was normal. We were gone maybe 30 minutes. When we came back..." He paused, struggling to continue. "Take your time, Corporal. When we came back, everyone was gone. The positions they'd been building were there, but the men were gone. We searched everywhere, called out, checked all the dugouts. Nothing. It was like they'd just stopped existing." "Did you see or hear anything unusual while you were gathering wood? Any lights, sounds, anything that seemed out of place?" Sokolov thought for a moment. "Now that you mention it, sir, yes. There was a sound, very high-pitched, almost at the edge of hearing. Like metal scraping on metal, but somehow different, distant. It lasted maybe a minute, then stopped. We commented on it but didn't think much of it at the time." "And did you experience any physical sensations? Headaches, dizziness, anything unusual?" "I felt strange, sir. Like the air was thick, pressing on me. Made it hard to breathe for a few seconds. But then it passed." Dr. Petrova, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "And your 2 companions? Did they mention feeling anything?" "Dmitri, the one who keeps talking about the light, he said he saw something. A flash in the sky, very bright but brief, in the direction of the company position. Said it hurt his eyes. Victor, the one who won't speak, he just dropped the wood he was carrying and stood there staring toward the company. Wouldn't respond when we called to him. Then when we got back and found everyone gone, he just broke. Started screaming, then went silent, and hasn't spoken since." Volkov exchanged glances with Kuznetsov and Petrova. The high-pitched sound, the sensation of pressure, the flash of light, these were all consistent with previous incident reports. But having survivors who had been close enough to experience secondary effects was unusual and potentially valuable. Dr. Petrova set up her instruments around the company position, taking readings and recording data in her notebook. "The electromagnetic signature is consistent with other incidents," she reported. "Elevated background radiation, approximately 3 rems above normal. Unusual isotope ratios in soil samples. And this," she indicated one of her instruments, which was producing readings that meant nothing to Volkov but clearly troubled her. "This is measuring quantum fluctuations in the local space-time fabric. The readings are off the charts. Whatever happened here significantly disturbed the fundamental structure of reality itself." "In terms I can understand, Doctor?" Volkov requested. "In simple terms, Lieutenant, something punched a hole in the world. Right here, in this exact spot. The hole has closed now, but the scar remains. The fabric of space-time has been stretched, warped. It will take weeks or months to fully heal, to return to normal parameters. And the men? Where did they go when this hole opened?" Petrova shook her head. "I don't know. None of us knows. Through the hole, presumably, to wherever it led. But whether that's another location in our world, another dimension, another time period, or simply nowhere, we cannot determine." Kuznetsov had been examining the scene with the practiced eye of a combat veteran. "Lieutenant, come look at this." Volkov joined him at a position where the company had been stringing barbed wire. The wire was still there, properly positioned and secured. But one section, approximately 2 meters in length, was different. The wire in this section was partially melted, fused together in places, discolored by what appeared to be extreme heat. "The wire on either side is fine," Kuznetsov pointed out. "Just this section is affected. And look at the posts." The wooden posts supporting the wire showed scorch marks on the sides facing toward the company position, as if they had been exposed to a brief but intense burst of radiant heat from that direction. Whatever happened emanated from the center of the position, Kuznetsov concluded. The evidence suggests a burst of energy moving outward from a central point. Men at the periphery of the position would have been affected first, those in the center slightly later. The expansion would have taken perhaps 2 or 3 seconds to encompass the entire company area. "Could anyone have survived?" Volkov asked. "Could anyone have been outside the affected radius?" "The 3 survivors we have were the only ones outside the radius," Kuznetsov said. "Everyone else would have been caught in the expansion. No chance to run, no time to react, just gone." They spent 2 days at the site, collecting evidence, taking measurements, interviewing the survivors repeatedly to extract every possible detail. At night, they slept in a tent positioned well away from the incident site. None of them wanted to spend darkness in the place where reality had been torn. On the second night, Volkov was awakened by screaming. He grabbed his pistol and rushed from his tent to find one of the survivors, Dmitri, the one who had seen the flash, standing at the edge of the incident site, pointing at something and screaming incoherently. Volkov approached cautiously, trying to calm the man, trying to see what he was pointing at. There was nothing there, just the empty positions, dark and silent in the moonlight. But Dmitri continued pointing, continued screaming, his words dissolving into raw sound that spoke of terror beyond articulation. Dr. Petrova appeared with a sedative, and together they restrained Dmitri long enough to administer it. As the drug took effect and his screaming subsided to whimpers, he managed to gasp out a few words that chilled Volkov to his core. "They're still here," Dmitri whispered. "The others, they're still here. They're trying to tell us something. They're trying to warn us. Can't you see them? Can't you hear them?" Volkov looked at the empty positions and saw nothing, heard only the wind. But Dmitri's conviction was absolute, his terror genuine. Either the man was experiencing a complete psychological break, or he was perceiving something the rest of them could not. Given everything Volkov had learned, given the nature of the phenomena they were investigating, either possibility seemed equally plausible. Over the following months, Volkov and his team investigated 17 more disappearance incidents across the Eastern Front. Each followed the same basic pattern, though details varied. Some incidents affected only a handful of men. Others consumed entire companies or battalions. Some left clear physical evidence: burned circles, melted metal, unusual radiation signatures. Others left almost no trace beyond the absence of the personnel who had been present. But one pattern became increasingly clear: the incidents were accelerating. What had begun as occasional, isolated occurrences in the early months of the war had become a regular phenomenon by late 1942. Volkov's team was responding to new incidents almost weekly, rushing from one site to another, collecting evidence that accumulated in classified archives without producing understanding. In December 1942, Volkov was summoned to Moscow for a briefing that included not just NKVD officials, but representatives from the highest levels of Soviet military intelligence and scientific establishment. In a secure conference room deep beneath the Kremlin, he found himself presenting findings to an audience that included generals, academicians, and he suspected but could not confirm, potentially Stalin himself. Observing from behind a screened partition, Lieutenant Volkov, the presiding general, began. Your team has investigated more of these incidents than any other unit. Based on your observations, can you provide an assessment of the threat level and any recommendations for defensive measures? Volkov stood, his uniform freshly pressed for this rare appearance before senior leadership, his notes prepared carefully. Comrade General, based on 23 detailed investigations and analysis of reports from 47 additional incidents, I can provide the following assessment. The phenomena represents an ongoing, unpredictable threat to Soviet military personnel. Incidents show no correlation with tactical situations, weather conditions, or enemy activity. They appear to strike randomly, though frequency has increased approximately 300% since July 1941. Total personnel losses attributed to these incidents now exceed 3,000 soldiers, though official records list these casualties under conventional categories. He paused, gauging the reaction of his audience. Faces were grim but attentive. Regarding defensive measures, I must report that we have identified no reliable method to predict or prevent incidents. Early warning symptoms, headaches, sensory disturbances, occur in approximately 40% of cases, but are not consistent enough for predictive use. Physical barriers provide no protection. Incidents have occurred in reinforced bunkers, in open fields, in forests, and in urban areas with equal frequency. The only factor that appears to provide protection is distance. Personnel more than 150 meters from the epicenter of an incident are typically unaffected. So you're telling us we're helpless against this threat? Another general interrupted. That we can do nothing? Not helpless, Comrade General, but significantly constrained. We have developed rapid response protocols that allow us to investigate incidents within hours rather than days, improving our evidence collection. We have created a classification system that helps identify incident types and potentially predict their characteristics. Dr. Petrova's team has developed instruments that can detect residual signatures from recent incidents, which may eventually lead to prediction capabilities. But a reliable defense mechanism? No, Comrade General. We have not achieved that. A civilian academic identified only as academician Volkov, recognized as one of the Soviet Union's leading physicists, spoke up. Lieutenant, you mentioned incident types. Can you elaborate? Yes, academician. We have identified 3 primary categories. Type 1 incidents involve complete disappearance of all personnel in the affected zone, typically with minimal physical evidence beyond the absence itself. Type 2 incidents include significant physical evidence, burned areas, melted materials, unusual radiation, and occasionally produce survivors who were at the periphery. Type 3 incidents, the rarest category, involve not just disappearance, but also temporal or spatial displacement of personnel or equipment. Temporal displacement, the academic asked sharply. You have evidence of time travel? We have evidence of something that might be interpreted as temporal displacement, Volkov said carefully. In 3 documented cases, equipment that disappeared during an incident later reappeared in the same location days or weeks after the incident. In one case, a soldier's personal effects, a watch specifically, appeared in a location where the owner had disappeared, but the watch showed a date 2 weeks in the future. When that date arrived, it matched normal time precisely. This suggests something. But whether it's actual time displacement or something else that produces similar observations, we cannot determine with certainty. The discussion continued for over 3 hours, with Volkov and other specialists presenting their findings, theories, and the frustrating gaps in their understanding. The officials asked pointed questions, demanded explanations that could not be provided, and ultimately expressed dissatisfaction with the lack of concrete solutions. As the meeting concluded and participants were filing out, Volkov was approached by an elderly man in civilian clothes who had been sitting quietly in the back of the room. The man's face was deeply lined, his eyes sharp with intelligence. "Lieutenant Volkov, a moment of your time," the man said in a voice that suggested his request was not optional. They stepped into an adjacent room, empty except for a table and chairs. The man closed the door and introduced himself as academician Sergei Vavilov, a name Volkov recognized as belonging to one of the Soviet Union's most prominent physicists. "Lieutenant, what you described in there, the temporal displacement, that is more significant than you perhaps realize," Vavilov said. "If these incidents truly involve manipulation of time, even on a small scale, then we are dealing with technology or natural phenomena that represents physics beyond our current understanding. Possibly physics that should not exist according to our theories. I don't understand, academician. Time, Lieutenant, is not a dimension that can be easily manipulated. Our understanding of physics suggests that time travel, if possible at all, would require energy levels approaching the output of entire stars. The fact that these incidents can displace objects or people through time, repeatedly and apparently without massive energy expenditure, suggests that our understanding of physics is incomplete. Fundamentally, radically incomplete. What are you saying?" Vavilov sat down heavily, suddenly looking even older. "I am saying that whatever is causing these incidents, whether it's extraterrestrial visitors, dimensional rifts, or something else entirely, it operates according to physical principles we do not understand. And until we understand those principles, we cannot develop countermeasures. We are like medieval warriors facing modern artillery. Our weapons are simply inadequate to the task because we lack the foundational knowledge necessary to develop appropriate responses. Is there any hope of developing that knowledge? Perhaps. If we can continue to study the incidents, collect enough data, perhaps patterns will emerge that allow us to construct new theoretical frameworks. But that will take time, years, possibly decades. In the meantime, soldiers will continue to disappear, and we will be powerless to stop it." Volkov left the Kremlin that evening with a profound sense of helplessness. He had been investigating these incidents for months, had seen the evidence firsthand, had interviewed survivors and examined sites and accumulated data. And yet they were no closer to understanding than they had been at the beginning. They had documented the phenomenon thoroughly, categorized it carefully, analyzed it methodically. But understanding remained elusive and prevention impossible. In March 1943, as the war entered its third year, Volkov received an urgent summons from Commissar Volsky. A major incident had been reported near Kursk, larger in scope than anything previously documented. An entire regiment, nearly 2,000 soldiers, had reportedly disappeared simultaneously. If the report was accurate, it would represent by far the largest single incident since these phenomena had begun. Volkov assembled his team and traveled to Kursk by priority military transport, arriving within 24 hours of receiving the summons. What they found there exceeded even their worst expectations. The regiment had been positioned along a defensive line in preparation for expected German offensive operations. The positions were well constructed, properly fortified, supplied and equipped according to standard military procedures. And on the morning of March 12, 1943, all 1,147 soldiers in that regiment had vanished. The scale of the scene was overwhelming. Trenches stretched for kilometers, all empty. Artillery positions stood unmanned, guns ready to fire but no crews present. Supply dumps contained ammunition, food, medical supplies, everything a regiment needed except the soldiers themselves. Personal effects were everywhere, thousands of items left behind by men who had simply ceased to be there. But the most disturbing element was at the center of the regimental position, a circular depression approximately 50 meters in diameter, where the ground had subsided roughly 2 meters below the surrounding terrain. The earth within this depression was blackened and crystalline, as if it had been subjected to temperatures high enough to partially vitrify the soil. And in the exact center of this depression was something none of them had seen before, a metallic object, roughly spherical, approximately 1 meter in diameter, partially embedded in the crystallized earth. Dr. Petrova approached the object cautiously, her instruments registering readings that made her stop repeatedly to double-check her equipment. "This is impossible," she muttered. "These readings are impossible. What are you detecting?" Volkov asked. "Radiation levels that should kill us all within minutes, yet are somehow contained within a 1 meter radius of the object. temperature fluctuations that swing between near absolute zero and several hundred degrees Celsius, changing every few seconds, electromagnetic fields strong enough to disrupt my instruments, and quantum signatures that suggest this object exists in a state of superposition, that it's simultaneously here and not here, occupying this location and another location concurrently. Could this be the source? The cause of the disappearances? Possibly. Probably. I don't know. Petrova's scientific composure was cracking, her voice rising with a mixture of excitement and fear. This could be a device of some kind, or it could be a naturally occurring phenomenon. It could be extraterrestrial technology, or it could be something else entirely. Lieutenant, we need specialists, equipment, resources beyond what we have here. This is the breakthrough we've been seeking, but we're not equipped to properly study it. Volkov radioed for additional support, requesting every specialist and piece of equipment that could be spared. Over the next 3 days, the site became a hive of activity as scientists, military personnel, and NKVD security troops descended on the location. The metallic sphere was carefully excavated, measured, photographed, analyzed with every instrument available. Theories multiplied, arguments broke out among the specialists, and no consensus emerged about what the object was or what had happened to the missing regiment. On the 4th day, something changed. The object, which had been inert since its discovery, began to emit a low humming sound. Dr. Petrova's instruments went haywire, registering energy outputs that should have been impossible. The humming grew louder, developing harmonics that seemed to resonate in ways that made people's teeth ache and their vision blur. Everyone back, Volkov ordered.
Clear the area now.
Personnel scrambled away from the depression as the humming intensified. The air around the sphere began to shimmer, distorting like heat haze but far more pronounced. Volkov watched from 200 meters away, seeing the sphere begin to glow with light that hurt to look at directly, and then, impossibly, the sphere began to rise. It lifted slowly from its position embedded in the crystallized earth, rotating as it ascended, the humming becoming almost unbearably loud. It rose to perhaps 50 meters altitude, hovered there for a moment that seemed to stretch forever, and then simply vanished. Not fading, not flying away, just ceasing to exist between one instant and the next. The silence that followed was profound. Everyone stood motionless, staring at the empty sky where the sphere had been, trying to process what they had witnessed. Dr. Petrova was the first to move, rushing back to the depression with her instruments. "The readings are dropping," she called out. Whatever that thing was doing, it stopped. The ambient energy levels are returning to normal. It's as if it was never here, but it had been there. They had all seen it. They had measured it, photographed it, touched it, and now it was gone, taking with it perhaps their best chance of understanding what had been happening all along. Volkov filed his report with a sense of defeat. They had encountered something unprecedented, had been on the verge of potentially understanding the phenomenon, and it had slipped through their fingers. The missing regiment was never recovered. The sphere, despite intensive searches by aircraft and ground parties, was never found again. The incident was classified at the highest level and buried in archives that few would ever access. The war continued. Germany was eventually defeated, pushed back across the territories it had conquered, finally destroyed in the ruins of Berlin in May 1945. The Soviet Union emerged victorious but scarred, having suffered approximately 27 million dead, a number so vast it defied comprehension. Among those millions were the thousands who had disappeared without trace in the incidents. Volkov and his team had investigated. They were listed in official records as killed in action, their families told they had died heroically defending the motherland. The truth, that they had been taken by something unexplained, that they had vanished into unknown fate, that they might be dead or might be elsewhere, displaced in space or time or dimension. That truth was never told. Dmitri Volkov survived the war. He was promoted to major, awarded medals for his service, and quietly transferred to a special unit within Soviet military intelligence where he continued investigating anomalous phenomena for another decade. The disappearances did not end with the war. They continued, though at reduced frequency, into the post-war period. Volkov investigated dozens more incidents, accumulated thousands of pages of documentation, and never found definitive answers. He retired in 1955, took an apartment in Moscow, and tried to live a normal life. But the questions never left him. What had happened to those men? Where did they go when they vanished? Were they dead, or did they still exist somewhere, trapped in whatever realm or time or dimension they had been taken to? And what was the sphere he had seen at Kursk? Technology or natural phenomenon? Tool or being? Threat or neutral observer? He wrote a memoir in the 1960s, carefully omitting all classified information, writing only about the conventional aspects of his wartime service. The memoir was published to modest success and earned him a small pension supplement. But the story he truly wanted to tell, the story of the disappearances, the investigations, the evidence of something beyond human understanding operating during humanity's most destructive conflict, that story remained classified, locked in archives that would not be opened in his lifetime. Volkov died in 1987 at age 68, his secrets intact. He was buried with military honors in a cemetery on the outskirts of Moscow, his gravestone listing his rank and decorations but saying nothing about the true nature of his service. His classified files remained sealed in Soviet and later Russian archives, seen by very few, their contents never publicly acknowledged. In the decades since, occasional researchers have uncovered fragments of the story. German military records include references to similar incidents, suggesting that the phenomena affected both sides of the conflict. Japanese military documents mention unusual disappearances during their operations in China and the Pacific. British and American archives contain scattered references to unexplained losses of personnel under circumstances that defy conventional explanation, but no comprehensive account exists. No official acknowledgement has ever been made. The thousands who vanished during World War II, taken not by bullets or shells or bombs but by something else, something that operated according to rules we do not understand. They remain absent from history except as statistics of conventional casualties. The phenomenon itself appears to have continued, though perhaps with less frequency, into the post-war period and possibly to the present day. Military organizations around the world maintain small, classified units that investigate unusual incidents, collect evidence that cannot be explained, and maintain silence about findings that would challenge accepted understanding of reality. And somewhere in Russian archives, in files that few are cleared to access, the investigations conducted by Dmitri Volkov and his team remain preserved, thousands of pages documenting the impossible, recording evidence of something that should not exist, telling stories that cannot be told. The title of this account: The Day Soviet Soldiers Vanished into Thin Air. The Dyatlov Pass Mystery of World War II references that famous incident of 1959 where 9 Soviet hikers died under mysterious circumstances in the Ural Mountains. The Dyatlov Pass incident generated decades of speculation, theories ranging from avalanche to secret military testing to paranormal causes. It remains unsolved, its details subject to endless debate and interpretation. But the wartime disappearances that Volkov investigated were different in one crucial respect. They were witnessed, documented and investigated in real time by military personnel trained to observe and record accurately. The evidence they collected was preserved, analyzed, and archived. This was not folklore or legend or ambiguous circumstances generating speculation. This was documented military history that has been systematically suppressed and classified. The soldiers who vanished into thin air during World War II deserve to have their story told, even if that story raises more questions than it answers, even if it challenges comfortable assumptions about the nature of reality and the limits of human understanding. They served their nations, they faced unimaginable dangers, and they encountered something beyond anything their training or experience had prepared them for. Some died conventionally in combat against human enemies. Others disappeared, taken by something unknown. Their fate a mystery that remains unsolved 8 decades later. This account, constructed from fragments of declassified documents, from testimonies given decades after the events, from evidence that has slowly emerged as archives have opened, represents an attempt to honor those vanished soldiers by acknowledging that something extraordinary happened to them. Whether that something was extraterrestrial intervention, dimensional rifts, time displacement, or some phenomenon entirely beyond current scientific framework, we do not know. Perhaps we never will. But the evidence suggests that during humanity's largest and most destructive conflict, another force was also present, watching, perhaps intervening, taking soldiers from both sides for purposes we cannot determine. The ground beneath their feet literally moved, reality shifted and thousands of men stepped from the world we know into somewhere else. Wherever that elsewhere is, whatever happened to them there, they are lost to us now, vanished into thin air, leaving behind only questions, mysteries, and the haunting knowledge that the universe contains more strangeness than we have yet begun to understand.